the community really did rally. They rallied around the families of the fallen four officers. They rallied around the RCMP community locally. They rallied around the RCMP community, the broader RCMP community. And they really rallied to kind of hold each other up.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. Today we reflect on a tragedy that shook the heart of our nation, a tragedy that even 20 years later remains etched in the memory of Albertans and Canadians alike. It was on March 3rd, 2005, when Constables Anthony Gordon, Leo Johnston, Brock Myrol, and Peter Schiemann, four dedicated RCMP officers, made the ultimate sacrifice while serving and protecting their community of Mayerthorpe, Alberta. Their bravery, their commitment to duty, and their unwavering sense of justice were met with an unthinkable act of violence. And in the wake of that tragedy, a community and indeed a nation mourned. But in the years since, Mayerthorpe has done more than just remember these four men. The Fallen Four Memorial Park stands today as a testament not just to loss, but to legacy. It is a place where the names are not forgotten, where stories continue to be told, and where thousands of visitors each year pause to honor the sacrifice of these four brave men. It is a place of healing, a reminder that even in moments of great sorrow, communities come together to support, to honor, and to ensure that those lost are never lost to time. Now, as we mark 20 years since that tragic day, we sit down today with Mayerthorpe Mayor Janet Jabush about the impact of this loss, how the community has honored its fallen heroes, and how resilience, remembrance, and unity have shaped Mayerthorpe in the years since. Because in the face of tragedy, the strength of a community is measured not just in grief, but how it chooses to remember. This is Municipal Affairs. Mayor, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about 20 years later. On March 3rd, 2005, an unthinkable act happened. Four dedicated men in the line of duty were taken too soon from us, protecting your community of Mayerthorpe and the surrounding area. I want to start by going back to those first initial days after the tragedy unfolded, where four RCMP constables lost their lives. How did this tragedy impact the town of Mayerthorpe in those first early days, weeks, and months?
Well, pretty much as most people would imagine, there was a lot of shock. I think probably shock was one of the predominant feelings around town. Grief, of course. That's four young men, cut down in their prime. Not one of them was 30, Chris. There wasn't a 30-year-old among them. They were all under 30. So that's a hard hit for any community. Um, but I think kind of in the aftermath of that, and the reality of it is the shock and the grief settle in, that's going to be a long haul kind of a thing, right? So that settles in and you're going to be living with that for a while. And then I think probably, within a relatively short period of time, there was some anger because the perpetrator of this heinous act was someone well known to law enforcement. He'd been in jail, he'd been in trouble, he'd been under surveillance, all of those things. So I think there was probably a measure of anger involved in the aftermath of that because, for all intent and purposes, people were feeling like that really didn't need to happen. If the justice system had managed that human being as effectively as one would always hope the justice system does, I think there's a real strong feeling that that didn't have to happen.
Now, 20 years later, we're commemorating the 20th anniversary of this horrendous tragedy in your community. What's been the long-term effect of this tragedy on your community over the last 20 years? Or has the community, and I don't want to say rallied because I don't want to make it sound like people are over it, because you never get over it, a tragedy like this. But as mayor of your community today, do you still feel the impacts of that fateful day on March 3rd, 2005, 20 years later?
Every time I go to the park, Chris, every time I go to the park, we've got that beautiful memorial facility here in Mayerthorpe with larger than life, literally larger than life statues of those four guys. And every time I'm there, it's it's like a revisit of all of that stuff. In the aftermath of the tragedy, with a little bit of time, the community really did rally. They rallied around the families of the fallen four officers. They rallied around the RCMP community locally. They rallied around the RCMP community, the broader RCMP community. And they really rallied to kind of hold each other up. And it was quite something to see the youngsters in the elementary school here in town. Man, I have never seen I've never seen anything like the determination of that group of kids, because it was partly them and partly a really sturdy community citizen by the name of Margaret Fraser Thibault, who were really the catalyst behind the memorial as it stands now. But those kids went out and raised money. They did bottle drives. I mean, they wanted to make sure that there was something in this community to recognize that sacrifice. So they rallied in the near term. And since that, lots of them come back for the milestone memorial times, like 5, 10, 15, now 20 years. Many of them come back every year to mark that day.
I was reading an article from last year, and it said that traditionally there's about 7,000 people, thousands of people who come to this memorial, not just from Mayerthorpe, not just from Alberta, but from across Canada, because this tragedy was a wake-up call that it could happen in any small town community. How does the town ensure that the park remains a place of remembrance and reflection for generations to come? Because time often washes away scars, washes away memories, but this Fallen For Memorial Park is a testament to remembrance. So, what does the town do to commemorate these fallen four outside of the park? Or is the park the legacy that this tragedy has ensured?
That's a really good question, Chris. The park really is the legacy. There's been an interesting evolution, if you will. Initially the park was a building with the statues and those other bits around it. But that building initially was dedicated to those four guys. Each one had, like, the rectangle shaped main room, each guy had a section that was his, and there was memorabilia for each one, little things that people from all over the world, Chris, had made. They'd make a Peter Schiemann one and a Leonid Johnston one and a Brock Myrol one and a Tony Gordon one. And every guy, there were little crocheted RCMP officers. Each guy had their own showcase, if you will, plus the portraits that hang in that room. And then I think I'm going to go back 3 years now. It might even be four, Chris. The Fallen Four Society asked the town of Mayerthorpe to take control of the property itself. So that now the town, rather than the Fallen Four Society owning the building in the park, the town of Mayerthorpe owns all of that, but the Fallen Four Society continues to run the park space while our public library is now housed in that building. And lots of people might remember that there was a bit of, what's a good word? Controversy. Let's call it controversy over how those fellows were remembered. Some were great with the idea of this memorial, and others related to these guys, like family members, were more of the mind that something, um, an asset to the community, like sometimes people build memorial swimming pools or they build memorial, those sorts of things. So the family would was of the mind that that would be a better way to remember these guys. So when the town of Mayerthorpe had the opportunity to assume control of the property itself, the all the memorabilia that was contained in that room. If the family members wanted some of it, they got that. The rest of that memorabilia, Chris, now has a home at Depot in Regina. You mentioned you're going to Regina. Maybe pop over and see what's there at Depot because there's a museum there. So, all of that memorabilia is now at Depot and can be viewed there. What remains in that space is those four big portraits of those guys, and then there is one other big portrait that's all four guys. And now it's our public library, Chris. I can't help but think that the family members that questioned the wisdom of, a simple place to go and stare at statues, I can't help but think that they would be pleased with the new iteration, the evolution of that building. And it's a busy place, man. It's like the hub of our community. And then the memorial still stands. The statues are all still there. So
It does still stand, and I mentioned it a few moments ago, but this was a national wake up call for a lot of communities because this was now traditionally a more urban center, a big city challenge. But when this happened in Mayerthorpe, there was national attention on this tragedy. How did Mayerthorpe find the strength to move forward from this? Because I know your community. It is a tight-knit community. Everyone knows everyone. Like you said, everyone knew the perpetrator. But you have to rely on each other to get through a national tragedy like this. How did Mayerthorpe do that?
I think just the way you said, I think this community leaned on the people closest to them. They're the next door neighbors are the cops that lived in, and all of them lived here with the exception of Tony Gordon. He was from Whitecourt. Those guys all lived in town. So the next door neighbors held each other up. If you met somebody in the juice aisle at the co-op, there were hugs and tears and conversation. And I mean, it's one of the grief is a weird thing. And I mean, I think everybody's experienced grief in some way in their lifetime. But when this was personal and it was community. So it's a different thing. I think unless someone goes through something like this in a community, you'd have a hard time um, describing how that kind of a thing goes down. But really, Chris, I think the fact that people were, we had to go about our business. We had to, life goes on, as the saying goes, right? So we had to go about our business. Kids, the kids at the school, especially the ones that really knew the cops, because the cops were embedded in this community. The three guys that were from Mayerthorpe, very embedded in this community. They were in and out of the school doing stuff. So the kids all knew them. I think the kids at the elementary school really, really um, needed the time, they needed the space to kind of just go through what they were going through. And, we've got wonderful educators in our town, so they were able to give them that time and that space. And then for the rest of the community, those little things, like I said, bumping into somebody in the co-op and standing there and hanging on to each other for 3 or 4 minutes, or bumping into somebody at the coffee shop and sit down and put your head in your hand and talk and hold hands and hug and all of those things that you would expect, except it happened on a community scale, which is, I again, it's the time factor. You just have to. you have to live in the moment. And, there were a lot of moments that were hard to live through after that. But I think this town emerged from the other side of that initial shock, that initial grief and anger. I think this town emerged from the other side of that more unified. I think we felt like a tighter community after all of that.
You talk about the aftermath and the tight-knit community. This event shaped the way that communities approach safety and policing, and it has changed the way that many people look at policing in small rural communities today. As mayor 20 years later, how has that event changed the way that Mayerthorpe looks at community policing and safety today?
Um, well, I'll tell you, I was a realtor back then, Chris, and in the aftermath of all of that, I worked with um, the RCMP that were rotating out, that were transferring out, and I helped the new guys coming in get settled, find houses, get settled. Um, and it it was hard because it was hard for me because I wasn't really embedded in the community at that point in time. Um, I started to be more well known around town a little while after all of that happened, but I think, because I asked that question of the new RCMP officers that were rotating in. Um, the one fellow I remember, I looked at him and I said, "Wow, do you feel like you pulled the short straw on this? Because here you are in Mayerthorpe." And he said, "Absolutely not. I asked to come here." I said, "Really? Like after the tragedy, you asked to come here?" And he said, "Absolutely. This community is going to need people on the ground, still willing to go out there and do all the things that need to be done." And this was a young guy, newly married, no kids, like waiting to start a family. And I thought, man, you know, but he volunteered to come here. Like I don't know whether the RCMP put a call out. Because I mean, you go from a fully staffed RCMP detachment to all of a sudden you're three people down. Like you're short three guys immediately. Um, but there were some really intrepid uh young fellows that stepped up and actually requested a post here in Mayerthorpe. It's Mayerthorpe's long been viewed as a good training ground for new RCMP officers. Um, and they get a lot of experience with a lot of things here. We have a First Nation down the road that this detachment polices, and then there's all the normal things, the traffic act stuff and all of that. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised at the number of officers that actually requested to come here. Um, I think for the town itself, I mean, we have no control over the policing, right? That's kind of controlled somewhere else. We very regular, very two-way type communication between the town and the detachment for sure. Um, and I think after the tragedy, Chris, I think that communication between the town leadership and the detachment leadership, I think that became more regular. It was kind of more embedded in the relationship that we would get quarterly updates on crime statistics. And if there was anything else going on like that, we would be apprised of that, fairly quickly.
It
We've
would
always
help
had a
you
communications
advocate as
officer.
well. It would help you advocate to the provincial and federal government because I remember I don't remember it as well as you because you lived it, you were on the ground. But when this happened, a lot more municipalities were looking at how do we better work with our RCMP officers? How do we work better with our police officers to ensure that the municipality understands the needs and wants. So when they do have meetings with the Minister of Justice in a province or the Minister of Justice federally, they can have those tough conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's anytime I find often when the topic of policing in the province of Alberta comes up, people want to talk to me. Just because I'm the official face of the community, and because of what happened here on March 3rd, 2005. I often get asked those questions, and I got to tell you, when the current government started talking about a provincial police force, you wouldn't have found anybody screaming louder or longer than me to keep the RCMP where they're where we need them, where they deserve to be, where they're supposed to be, which is policing rural Alberta. We need them out here. That I can't, nothing outside of the flag for this country, there is nothing that engenders the pride of, of countrymen like the RCMP. Nothing like it.
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Um, we are commemorating the 20th anniversary on March 3rd. What do you hope people take away from this year's commemoration of this tragedy?
I hope that they take away, um, my hope is that the people that come to participate in the events tomorrow morning, um, spend a little bit more time in my town than just being at the park. I'd like them to know that Mayerthorpe is more than the tragedy. It's taken us a long time to kind of help everybody remember that this town is more than just what happened here 20 years ago. So I hope people take that away. I hope people take, I hope people internalize how important remembering events like this is. And not because we want to stand around and share Kleenexes and stuff like that, but because young men like this step up every day, whether it's in the armed forces or first responders, like EMTs and firefighters or police officers, RCMP officers. Young men and women step up into those roles every day, and I hope that people remember not just on that day, but that people remember that every single day, because I do. It's something that um, I've very much internalized. And again, whether it's RCMP or military or whatever it is, these are people that have chosen a life of service and not just, I mean, I'm a public servant as well, but I don't put myself in the line of fire. I wouldn't throw myself in front of a bullet, but that's what they're trained to do. So I hope people take away that we really, really need to be consistently, constantly grateful for these people that step into those roles, because not everybody can do it. That yet, and say thank you, for gosh sake, once in a while. If you see an RCMP officer at a Tim Hortons, buy him a coffee. Shake his hand and say thank you for your service, or that's kind of how I live my life. I've always got a Tim Hortons gift card in my back pocket, and if I happen to be in a Tim Hortons when there's a cop there, I slap it down on the table and tell him coffee's on me this time. Like it's not much, but it's my way of acknowledging that these people are in communities doing good work, and often going very much unacknowledged.
You took my next question right out of my hand there, because I was going to say, what does it mean to you personally to lead these commemorations 20 years later? Because your community has gone through so much and it is still standing tall. It is still a beacon of where hope can thrive, even in the darkest hours. For you personally, what does it mean for you to be a part of commemorating these four men who gave their lives in the line of duty to protect your community?
Honestly, Chris, serving as the mayor of this town has been humbling, and it has been one of the greatest honors of my life. I have family here, so I do what I do because I have family in this town. Um, but being able to stand at a microphone and provide words on behalf of this town, um, I'm there on behalf of the town, but for anybody that knows me, and you know me pretty well by now, um, it's not my brain that's at the microphone, it's my heart that's at the microphone. And for me, it's humbling and slightly terrifying, if I'm being truthful, to stand at that microphone and try to verbalize the the sentiments of an entire community. I hope I can do it justice. But you know what I find if I speak from my heart, it usually comes out the right way. I have a an older brother, Chris, who served almost 30 years as a Saskatoon City police officer. So cops have always had I've always had a soft spot in my heart for cops. Um, and that's never changed. My dad taught me as a kid, if you're in trouble, find a uniform, find a cop. He taught me that when I was a kid, and it's something I've remembered my entire life. I hope when I step up to that microphone tomorrow that I can speak um, eloquently and share from my perspective, anyways, where the town is right now. And you know, I just want to say thank you to all of the other first responders that are going to be there because we're going to have a lot of them there. Always on these milestone markers, there's usually a pretty big crowd that shows up. We've got quite an event planned tomorrow. We've got the K Division commander is coming out. The RCMP commissioner is coming out. We have two CF 18s, I want to say. We get a flyby tomorrow during the event. So yeah, there's been some pretty interesting stuff put together. The RCMP has looked after pulling the memorial together this year. Oftentimes it's the Fallen Force Society that does it, but every on the milestones, the RCMP has gotten involved. So the RCMP is involved in this one. They've kind of spearheaded everything and organized everything. I have been told, though, that the general feeling is that this is probably the last time the RCMP will actually um, participate on a, you know, kind of a national level, if you will, in this. And, you know, certainly people are going to come with and pay their respects and do the thing. But these milestones, you know, I guess at some point everybody's got to move on, and I think for the most part everybody has. You got to get to a point though, I think, Chris, where does gathering 40 or 50 or 100 people together every 5 years, does it serve a purpose? Because again, I go back to my sentiment earlier, instead of just picking a day to remember, to acknowledge, do it every day.
Final question for you, because I want to make sure people take this away. What do you see as the legacy of the fallen for continuing in years to come?
Wow, that's loaded. Um, you know, I got involved with local government on a committee back shortly after the tragedy happened. I sat on the Economic Development Committee for the town of Mayerthorpe, and I got sent to a little conference in Camrose, and I mean we were all still trying to figure out how to navigate around what had happened because you know for years and still to this day, Chris, if when you tell people where you're from, if they're not from Canada, you say Mayerthorpe, it's always, oh, that's the place those four cops were killed. It still happens today, Chris. And this town is so much more than that. But um, I was at this conference in Camrose, and we were talking about what assets your community had. How do you leverage the assets that your community has? And I put my hand up and I asked the facilitator, because I mean I'm still new to the whole economic development thing. I mean, I'm far better at it now than I used to be, but I'm still new to the whole economic development thing. And I put my hand up and I said to this facilitator, what do you do with, and I struggled for a minute, and then I said, I can't think of another way to put it, but what do you do with a golden albatross? because I feel like where I'm from, that's what's hanging around my neck. It's some people around the world know where Mayerthorpe is, but they know where Mayerthorpe is for the wrong reason. So it feels like a weight that this town carries all the time because that's why people remember who we are. I My goal as an elected official now is to try to do something different. And not that I want people to forget, Chris, because I surely don't want that. But my goal as an elected official now is for people to, when I say Mayor Thorpe, think about something else. Think about the fact that I don't know, think about the fact that we've become one of the most welcoming communities in the province. Think about the fact that our population went reversed its like pick something. But think about something other than the fact that, oh yeah, that's the place those four cops were killed. I want to have something here in Mayerthorpe that is memorable that isn't attached to that tragedy. Does that make sense?
It does. And while we should never forget the sacrifice the four men gave on that faithful day on March 3rd, 2005, their memories will never be forgotten with the Fallen Four Memorial Park. Their legacy will never be forgotten. Time heals wounds, but wounds will always be around. And I
Yep.
hope your community has rallied around each other like many other communities across this great country who have gone through similar challenges or worse challenges. And I'm not comparing apples to oranges, but I hope people take away that 20 years later, your community is still standing, is a thriving community, and is a community that is more than just a tragedy. It's a beacon of hope that many municipalities can look to. Mayor Jabush, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking half hour out of your day to talk about this faithful day and the legacy that has had on your community. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chris. I always appreciate talking to you, my friend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in for a special edition of Municipal Affairs. We hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights on how a tragedy can unite a community and a nation. To stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite platform or follow us on social media. For even more content and learn about the stories and people we feature on this show, visit us online at crossborderinterviews.ca. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time here on Municipal Affairs.